Hello, everybody, and thank you for showing up for the last session of our PWL International Seminar this year. As you know, this seminar is hosted by IFILNOVA in the context of the FCT-funded project Mapping Philosophy as a Way of Life, an Ancient Model, a Contemporary Approach, and this is already our session 8. Our speaker today is Jordi Crespo, one of our team members, and I'm very collaborators, and I'm very pleased to introduce him. Jordi Crespo is an independent researcher with a PhD in philosophy, epistemology, and history of culture. His dissertation revolved around the anonymous Lodidiensis, a papyrus of medical content in Greek from the 1st century of the Common Era. Before that, he had completed a master's in ancient philosophy, another master's in classics, and another master's in history of religions. He has worked as an associate lecturer of different subjects in philosophy at the Department of Humanities at the Pompeu Fabra University of Barcelona. And his field of research has mostly been philosophy and medicine in antiquity, but he's also interested in the reception of ancient philosophy in modern and contemporary philosophy. In this context, he's currently involved in 2 research lines, namely influence of Greek ethics on contemporary philosophy and Eidos, Plato, and modernity. This combination of interests in particular was precisely what pushed him to get close to philosophy's way of life, which is currently one of the main trends of his research. So today he's going to present a paper with the title Correspondence Matters, Friendship as Transformative Cultural Drive at Individual and Social Level. Very much looking forward to listen to it, Jordi, so ready when you are. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
Well, boas tardes e muito obrigado. Yes, this is the title of the presentation. I'm the honor, and I'm very proud to introduce to you and to share with you all. And well, I've prepared, as usual, a handout that I guess that you received because Marta very diligently shared it with you. And from time to time, I don't know whether I might share the screen with you or just I will make mention to the number of the text, because in the handout you have this text with numbers T1, T2, T3, and so on and so forth. So I will make mention to this, and I will read these fragments aloud. So if you are ready, I'm going to start because we are a bit late because of this inconvenience. And after that, I will be very happy to listen to your commands and your contributions to what I've said. This presentation is just an opus infieri, is a kind of work in progress, in the sense that I'm amassing a set of ideas. In my opinion, these ideas are meaningful, but I'm still working on them. And hopefully at the end of the process, at the end of the research, it will take the format of a contribution, a monograph, or something the like. So just to start with, by assuming a major premise in philosophy as a way of life, according to which, rather than informing or forming, the goal of philosophy resides in transforming the individual, it is in my aim to put friendship in relevance with the epistolary genre. A long-standing view calls that philosophical enterprise started with the emergence of texts. The practice of writing is deemed to be the context and the pretext giving rise to philosophical reflection in Western civilization. While the ties between writing and philosophy are clearly evident, it is no less true that philosophy experienced a gradual shift from a dialogical and oral activity towards a monological and written practice. This being an important point of contrast between the format that philosophy took in antiquity and in modern and contemporary times. Likewise, in ancient times, friendship involved an array of aspects, no longer extant neither in modern nor in contemporary times. Yet the point is that friendship is to be found at the basis of philosophical endeavor. This becomes plain from the etymology of the same very word, philosophy. This is something that I read in Marta Nussbaum 12 or 14 years ago. And from the fact that friendship is the type of human relationship where the performative goal of philosophy operates to the full. In the first instance, therefore, I shall delve into these two prefatory assumptions. And afterwards, my aim is to cast some light upon the epistolary genre. Although letters might have been the commonest way to bridge physical and spiritual distance for centuries, due to current virtual forms of communication, transmission, and information storage, letters are about to disappear. Moreover, in private correspondence, it seems that the act of writing text and friendship become more entangled than anywhere else. But leaving this aside, I shall argue that in the epistolary literature, friendship deploys at least in two intertwined ways. On the one hand, at individual level, friendship yields a guide for living. And on the other hand, at a social level, friendship serves as a conducive means to instruct someone who holds, or eventually will, political power in the principles of power exertion over the bodies and souls of others. In view of this, I have picked up 4 different clusters of letters, 2 attributed to 2 authors from antiquity, Hippocrates and Plato, and 2 other by authors from the modern period, Louise Vivers and René Descartes, with the aim of testing to what extent the content matches the double orientation just expounded. So by so doing, I expect to gain a better appreciation of the epistolary genre from a PWL perspective, a research line that, to my knowledge, nobody has approached so far, and that seems to me to be fruitful. So I'll start analyzing some of the main differences between philosophizing in antiquity and in the modern period, if you agree with that. Neither Plato nor any other Greek philosopher seem to have worried about the status or the existence of other minds, a problem which proved central to the philosophy of the modern period. If ancient philosophers dismissed this question, it was precisely because, to a great extent, ancient philosophy took place in the frame of a dialogue, and in such a frame it is assumed that people with whom one entertains in a dialogue do not differ to oneself. Above all, ancient philosophy was dialogical. The dialogical genre pretends to reproduce a conversation. It is an imitation of the viva voce, a living word. Writings were often motivated by verbal activity, for example, by debates held in schools. Ancient philosophy adopted a great diversity of literary genres, some of which are direct heirs of the spoken word. In contrast to the monotony of the modern era, dominated by the essay, this kind of genre, ancient philosophy expressed itself in aphorisms, apothegms, anecdotes, didactic poetry, symposia, memoirs, diatribes, biographies, parodies, satires, essays, problems, letters, but also and especially in dialogues. Apart from Plato, a number of Plato's companions wrote dialogues: Antisthenes, Phaedo of Elis, Euclid, Aeschines. All of them wrote dialogues. In the early form, these dialogues might have represented Socrates' direct conversation with an interlocutor without any additional narrative. But more complex literary motifs were soon added. Dialogue is a written genre that seeks to imitate, in prose, an exchange of questions and answers between 2 or more people, including commands of uncertainty between the participants. Memory was supported by the fact that the doctrines of each were personified, and thus the dramatic character became more popular and memorable than the original that had inspired it. In his dialogues, Plato displays a theater of the idea of ideas. Even though it is a literary fiction, characters can be introduced into the narrative. The dialogue gives the reader the illusion of participating in the event, and if one adds to this the fact that the work would be read aloud, the expression acquired the status of a theatrical performance. In the present days, the preferred word, the viva voce, does not play any prominent role due to it having been established that philosophy has to be produced, transmitted, and taught by means of books which have been written and are to be read in silence. The authority, the autoritas, of the philosopher relies on his writings and not on his words. It has been a long time since philosophy assumed a strong reading character, and accordingly, writing dominates the philosopher's whole life and deeds ever since. Such character is brought out in different ways. To begin with, the working space, places full of books, reference books, archives, and notebooks. These spots are intimate shelters, aloof from everyone, in which everything speaks of the personal joy felt by a lonely writer or a lonely reader. Writings are no more the material support for the voice of the author, and this silence has turned intellectual work into the bookish activity of a taciturn person. Therefore, text should contain a thick and extended bibliographical apparatus, which represents only a humble part of the huge amount of works consulted by the author. The philosophical writing is comprehensive of a vast net of quotations and references, in virtue of which authors disclose their intellectual debts, who express their thankfulness to other colleagues. In this way, too, they take part in the endless entanglement of written signs to which they are contributing. Hence, more than about the author, books tend to speak about other books. Nowadays, a few philosophers dare to challenge this intellectual and textual dispositif, to use a Foucaultian category. They mostly adopt the system and its rules as a matter of fact and with no hesitation. It makes them feel comfortable indeed. Every professional recognition and acknowledgement in a field is tantamount to commanding the series of writing skills. And what is more, one's career and reputation are at stake as soon as one biases or gets away from this set of given commands. Though there is room for relying on the oral discourse, it will be regarded as a maverick decision. There is nothing wrong in Socrates having done so, but it is at least anomalous for the today philosopher to go after Socrates' deeds. So that at the end of the day, it turns out that writing has become the most common, sensible, and important way for philosophers to express themselves. Even I need to convey this content in a form of writings, those authors who are reluctant to partake in the aforementioned state of affairs. For only in this way they ensure to reach out, partially at least, the audience they intend. It is no less true that this means is supplemented by other ones supplied by contemporary technology. Podcasts, meetings, speeches, workshops, weekend retirements, and so on and so forth, all these sort of events that we are holding. A case in point in this sense is that of Peter Kingsley. Educated in universities of prestige and with a considerable list of books and contributions in top-notch journals and high-ranked editorial houses, it was 20 years ago or so that his research took a turning point and led him to end up sick and tired of the official and traditional accounts in the history of ideas, and particularly in the field of ancient thought. Therefore, he started to abandon the accustomed channels of dissemination of academic philosophy and to assign himself the task of writing books with a view, among others, to dismantling a tradition which, in his opinion, has belied the truth and succeeded in presenting things in an opposite way this actually took place. Accordingly, in books as In the Dark Places of Wisdom in 1999, or in his more recent Reality, reedited in 2020, Kingsley's aim is oriented to unveil the truth behind a tradition which has largely misrepresented and misunderstood the origin, the motivations, and the goals of philosophical endeavor. His points of view are expressed by means of short and simple sentences, in brief chapters, abounding in the same very ideas, and conferring a sort of dramatic or novelistic style on his arguments, which is clearly at odds with the academic style. His books lack footnotes, and the ideas he might have borrowed from other authors are listed at the end of the books in a way which does not correspond to any reference standard. I guess that it is made on purpose, which causes some trouble when the time comes to retrieve information, even if these arguments appeal to the reader and they wish to read further. By contrast, and retaking the thread of the argument, the circumstances involved in the production of philosophy in the modern period are at the antipodes of those which gave rise to philosophy in antiquity. To start with, and by way of example, take Montaigne's decision of retreating to the library of the tower of his estate for the rest of his days, after recovering from falling off his horse during a hunting excursion. In addition to this, I could bring to your attention René Descartes' will to stay aloof as a necessary premise to bracket all our preconceived ideas, what he believed to constitute the punctum saliens of every sort of worthy philosophical inquiry. What becomes evident from the situation reported by Descartes in his meditations is loneliness and self-reclusion. Descartes is alone, and this situation is regarded as a sort of normal or necessary condition, which leads him to reflect in the way he does. This self-imposed aloofness enables him to meditate in the way he does it. Descartes writes from a lonely place and addresses his writing also to a lonely reader. This reading solitude would also explain why Descartes wrote the Meditations in Latin and not in French. Descartes resembles ancient philosophers inasmuch as not caring for the issue of the existence of other minds, but this is only because he does not take this issue into account whatsoever. In strong contrast with the social ego in Greco-Roman philosophy, Descartes' universe is inhabited as a single thinking monad, his own self. This view of philosophy as a factual possibility to understand the world from the privacy of one's cabinet will exert an enormous influence upon the rise and the composition of the novel genre in the modern period. Quixote is a telling example of someone who, after passing a long time reading books, entwisted in his own thoughts and remaining apart from the humdrum life, ends up losing his sanity and imagining living in a world of knights, castles, princesses, monsters, crusades, and truces which no longer existed in his day. After having outlined the contrast in philosophizing in the antiquity and in the modern period, now I shall move further to introduce some moot points when it comes to chart the notion of friendship. Now, anthropologists have popularized the idea that there are kinship-oriented versus friendship-oriented societies. It has been denied that the terms that are translated as friend or friendship in ancient Greek or Latin involve the personal intimacy and affection that are associated with the modern conception. Accordingly, philia in classical Greece is not at root a subjective bond of affection and emotional warmth, but entirely objective bond of reciprocal obligation. One's philos, one's friend, is the man one is obliged to help and on whom one can or ought to be able to rely for help when oneself is in need. Hence, the English saying, a friend in need is a friend indeed, which lies in a language game. The saying takes on two different meanings depending on the reading of the last word in the saying. As a single word, the intensive adverb indeed, or else as constituting two words, the preposition in followed by the noun did. Philia, however, is not a name for contract responsibilities or for the bond constituted by reciprocal obligations. It means affection in Greek generally. Now, chief among the errors is the widespread supposition that philia has no notion comparable to that of friendship in English, for covering so wide a range of relations as to be effectively a different concept. Indeed it is, but one type of philia corresponds closely to friendship, namely the affection that obtains between philoi or friends. Whether or not friendship served to consolidate small circles of aristocrats, its role in the politics of the Athenian democracy seems to have been marginal. Relations among philoi were in principle separate from public life. The situation takes a significant turn in the Roman world. One finds dramatic reduction of the emotive aspect of the Roman conception of amicitia in the fact that in the everyday language of Cicero's time, amicus meant no more than political follower. Roman political factions were welded together, less by unity of principle than by mutual interest and by mutual services, either between social equals as an alliance or from superior to inferior in a traditional and almost feudal form of plainship. On a favorable estimate, the bond was called amicitia, and otherwise it was called factio. This perspective set of ideas give us a clue of the difficulty in tackling the notion of friendship in antiquity. It is a tricky one for not being uniform over various cultures or even within a single culture. At any given moment, the core of the relationship in which I am interested may be characterized by a mutually intimate, loyal, and loving bond between two or few persons that is understood not to derive from membership in a group normally marked by native solidarity, such as family, tribe, or other such ties. Now, philia, amicitia, friendship, is implied either in philosophy and in philosopher, philosophia, philosophos. Though when the two parts of these compound nouns are inverted, it turns out that a friend becomes a sage, sophia philo, friend's wisdom. And on the grounds of such a concession, a sage friend is also the most appropriate person to give advice. Friendship is also the type of human relationship where the philosophy performative goal operates at its most. Now, according to Aristotle, friendship belonged to the proto-philosophia, to the prima philosophia. To some extent, everybody is aware of the input that Aristotle gave to friendship. Books 8 and 9 in the Nicomachean Ethics are devoted to study this particular human relationship and its several varieties. There, Aristotle makes the general claim that friendship is a necessary condition for happiness, and what is more, that no one can be happy or attain happiness without friends. The rich, the poor, youngsters, and elders, everybody, regardless of their social and economic condition, is in need of friendship. It is necessary for living a fulfilled life. Friendship is a must and an ought in human experience. Furthermore, it is also well known that Aristotle sketches three kinds of friendship on grounds of the sources of philia. So in general, Aristotle submits to the category of incidental friendship, the relationships which emanate from either personal profit or pleasure. By contrast, Aristotle argues it can be also distinguished an essential friendship, it's called katheautos, which abides in virtue, by virtue of what people are. Whereas the latter is rather scarce and tends to last for a long time. The former sources of friendship are many and subject to disappear as soon as the goals do not interest anyone or once they are achieved. Political relationships are those between fellow citizens because they may assume different forms depending on whether they have their source in mutual usefulness, pleasure, or respect for character. The three elements that motivate love in general. Things are lovable not for one quality only, but rather for one of the three. They may be useful, pleasant, or good. What is perhaps less known is that philosophical tradition attributes to Aristotle the striking saying, "O philoi oudeis philos," "O friends, there are no friends," a leitmotif that Jacques Derrida took for his Politique de l'amitié. Before Derrida, the saying had been first taken into consideration by Montaigne and later by Nietzsche, largely because of the double reading that the saying may have. Ho philoi oudeis philos, who has many friends, has no friends. There seems to be no way to make out whether Aristotle was actually fond of this saying, as being reported for the first time by Diogenes Laertius in the Lives of the Eminent Philosophers in Book 5, which, in dating from the 3rd century Christian era, is separated by 6 centuries from its alleged source. However, there might have been a strong contrast between the content and the purpose of books 8 and 9 in the Nicomachean Ethics and the saying. Friendship, as such, does not conform to the early Platonic dialogues of definition, in which Socrates investigates questions of the sort "ti esti," what is X. From a linguistic point of view, the term friend belongs to the category of the non-predicative. By this, it is meant those terms which do not permit to set a class of objects, but to assigning the entities to which one attributes the predicate in question. Friend does not define any sort of consistent cluster or class. Friendship is neither the property nor the quality of an object. Friend is an existential and not a categorial. In the same category of non-predicative fall insults. Friends are often compared to an other self, a heteros autos, an alter ego. This time, the forms in Greek and Latin cannot be held to be absolutely equivalent. In Greek, there are 2 forms to reference alterity: allos, which is related to the Latin alius, and heteros, related to the Latin alter. By the former, the general alterity is expressed, whereas the opposition between 2 people by the latter. Moreover, the Latin ego does not exactly correspond to the Greek autos, which means oneself. In antiquity, the issue of friendship overcomplicates, because philos is far from being the only term for friend. The relationship and the feeling falling into the field of friendship admits other terms, as hetairos and epitedeios, for instance, which are recurrent and oftenly used. Is there any significant difference between these 3 terms? Well, at this stage of my research, and much to my regret, I cannot provide you with a solid response in this sense. Doing so would involve screening a large number of occurrences of these terms in multiple texts and in multiple contexts. And for the sake of consistency and intellectual honesty, it will take much more time than I've had to this moment. However, for those who may take an interest in this particular question, I strongly recommend starting with a book by David Constant, Friendship in Classical World, 1999, which stands as one of the few, if not the only, monograph on the question of friendship in antiquity. Now I shall proceed now to considering the epistolary genre as cultural phenomenon. Now, among the letters that were classified in antiquity, the philosophical missive belongs to the most appreciated type, the letter of friendship. The genre occupied such a predominant place that Greek and Latin rhetoricians considered the message of friendship the most authentic of letters and promoted the practice of writing them. Letter writing was part of the advanced rhetorical exercises called prosopsis, by which students imitated a character, usually a celebrity, representing feelings or attitudes characteristic of them. This is why in antiquity certain pseudonymous letters, signed with the name of a famous author, were not considered forgeries. In many cases, there were respectful tributes to these illustrious authors. All the forms of friendship promoted by philosophical schools are expressed in letters, from the friendship with a strong communal and political character found in Aristotle, to the intensive private personal friendship extolled by Epicureans. The most representative philosophical letters belong to the panegyric species of rhetoric. This predominance is because philosophy seeks to promote a certain way of life through praise and censure. As an instrument of communication, the letter seems to have been employed as early as the 7th century before Christian era. But it was not until the last decades of the 5th century before Christian era that a specific name for letter, epistole, became indispensable. Originally, epistole meant instruction. Once the term became acclimatized to philosophy, it exploited all the resources that the letter made available to it. It used it as an instrument of exhortation, as a form of doctrinal exposition, as a summary, as a weapon of defense and attack, and even as a means of consolation for afflicted persons. From the 4th century before Christian era, only 2 collections of letters have survived. Those of Plato, subject of intense disagreement, and the letters of Isocrates. But from then on, their presence is permanent, as evidenced by the letters of Epicurus and later those of Seneca. The epistolary genre attempts to compensate for the separation between master and disciple by preserving in writing the freshness, spontaneity, and prestige of the master's voice. The letter, which has almost become a relic, is a genre of which philosophy has made extensive use. The letter lends itself perfectly to philosophical training at a distance because the first duty of a letter is to re-establish a presence. The letter is an object that moves in between presence and absence, when the world was not connected as it is today, and when the categories of space and time had not yet been subverted by technology as they are today. The letter sought to revive the appearance and the living voice of the absent. The letter was a lesser evil, a partial remedy against separation. To achieve this, 2 strategies are normally employed: the interpolation into the message of abundant hints of the author's personality, making the letter a kind of portrait of one's own soul, and the inclusion of expressions with which the author implies that they feel the presence of the recipient of the missive. Regardless of the difference it might show with correspondence nowadays, correspondence plays the role of a straight and immediate communication between 2 subjects to whom, in most cases, it is perfectly possible to identify. Descartes' correspondence can be tantamount to the deployment of an autonomous subject, a full, sufficient, and free subject, which is only responsible for its own accountability, and from this personal perspective, for that of the rest. In his correspondence, Je, Descartes, vous parle, and in virtue of it, he identifies himself and his recipients. Descartes did not belong to the clergy, nor he lectured in any university. He was a philosopher, a scientist, and whose only defense consisted in the distinction and clarity of his ideas and arguments. Therefore, Descartes introduces himself as a subject, and his correspondence with Elizabeth of Bohemia, and later on with Christine of Sweden, takes particular relevance in this sense. But correspondence, that is, the exchange of writings between the personal and the public spheres, it is relatively new form of writing. Letters circulated in many different ways, but they all showed extremely hazardous nature of their transmission. Letters were read, copied, and constituted material of plagiarism. The privacy and inviolability of correspondence is a right, which, as it happens with a good deal of present rights and entitlements, will only be granted with time and after a lot of struggling. But this right was somehow unknown in antiquity, not because it had yet to be gained, but because unless the corresponsal's will was to be read in silence and privately, in antiquity letters used to be read aloud and their content shared with other people. Although the philosophers chose precise addressees for their letters, for instance, Herodotus, Meneceus, Pythocles, Lucilius, they adopted the tone of a more general persuasive discourse and hoped that they would be of benefit to a larger number of disciples. This non-private document character may seem strange to our eyes, but it was in the nature of the ancient letter as a publication space. It allowed the author's words to be known by reading them aloud or by copying them. When the letter reached its destination, the recipient usually preferred to have it read aloud by his reader, especially if friends were present. who put thus be private information useful to all. It is understandable then that a large number of ancient authors composed their letters with a view to their reception by very wide audiences, who would not see the writing directly, but would receive it by listening to it. The ancient letter was a personalized document that at the same time served as a support for the dissemination of ideas. Now, my contention is that in epistolary literature, friendship takes a twofold orientation. In my opinion, it can be argued that in the epistolary literature, friendship deploys in two intertwined ways. I insist on it once again. First of all, in virtue of an appreciation of the soul of the addressee by the author of the missive, at individual level, friendship yields guide for living. And in second place, at a social level, friendship also serves as a conducive means to instruct someone who detains or eventually will detain political power in the principles of the art of self-mastery, and more importantly, in those of power exertion over the bodies and souls of others. Now, having said this, from now onward, I shall go on casting this twofold contention into different clusters of letters, which range through several authors from various historical periods, in order to make out how these textual sources fit in the intuition that I have just sketched. Of course, this top-down procedure comes as no news, novitas non veritas. In fact, I bound myself to repeat what the physicist Albert Einstein declares in a letter from the 7th May 1952 to his friend Maurice Sullivan, to be the way he, Einstein, and science in general, tends to work and proceed. From an epistemological point of view, Einstein argues, the explanations and the descriptions of the observable worldly phenomena always depend on something beyond those very phenomena, so that only the scientific theories do consist in fitting the invented hypotheses with the data that match perceptual inputs. But in every theory, it is also implicit that the imagined presuppositions do not have to be necessarily demonstrable by empirical evidence. Einstein's words show that scientific knowledge precisely consists in letting imagination play freely upon phenomena, and secondly, in adopting only those metaphors which capture reality the best. Now, I will start with dealing with the Hippocratic letters and the Hippocrates' visit to Democritus. The artful forgery of Cervantes' imagination, to which I have referred above, can be taken as a further development of the case of Democritus of Abdera, whose strange ailment is reported in a collection of letters dating almost 1500 years prior to the publication of Cervantes' novel. The novel genre serves as a start in dealing with the literary genre with which I'm really concerned, the epistolary genre. It is in general acknowledged that Anaxagoras of Clazomenae is responsible for the introduction of the idea of book in Athens. Despite the chronological mismatch, the fact is that most paintings from the Renaissance and the modern period, taking Hippocrates' visit to Democritus for subject, tend to represent this pre-Socratic philosopher surrounded by books and immersed in his readings. And for this reason, he is credited with having lost his sanity. I know Helder is laughing a little bit because we discussed this topic in Lisbon, I guess, if I can remember properly. In antiquity, medical art is concerned with the body and philosophy with the soul. Yet these areas of competence bring about a series of problems, particularly as to the nature and the treatment of the emotions of patients, pathe, affectiones, perturbationes. Since being precisely here where mind and matter, to put it in extreme dualistic terms, interact the most. The scientist must define emotions not only by the cognitive element, which constitutes the form of the emotion, but also by the underlying physiological process, which constitutes its matter. In the light of this Aristotelian hylomorphic take, therefore, two alternative concepts of therapy arise. emotions might be treated either by addressing the physiological process or by addressing the cognition. The former type of prospect refers to medicine, whereas the latter to philosophy. Now, the bile, and more concretely, the black bile, accounts for being the cause of melancholy, a disease having a direct impact on behavior and treated at length in several medical and philosophical writings from the antiquity. An avoidable reference in this particular is the 23rd aphorism in aphorism 6, where melancholy is meant to be a fear or depression that is prolonged. In the beginning of the 19th century, Jean-Etienne Quirol, forefather of modern psychiatry, named melancholy also as lipomania. The issue at hand is addressed in a problem 30 attributed to Aristotle and bearing the title Problems Connected with Thought, Intelligence, and Wisdom, which starts with the question, hearing the whole problem. This is text number 1 you hand out. Why is it, I'm reading literally, why is it that all men who have become outstanding in philosophy, statesmanship, poetry, or the arts are melancholic, and some to such an extent that they are infected by the diseases arising from the black bile? This is the question, the starting question in the Problemata 30. On the grounds of Aristotle Problemata 30, melancholy is straightforwardly attached to black bile, more concretely to its spontaneous production after nourishment. Like many other affections, melancholy also arises from an excess of black bile. The men of genius, the peritoi, are melancholic or indeed prey to epileptic strokes because of the black bile. The period when the pseudo-Hippocratic letters were penned is believed to have been the second half of the 1st century before Christian era and the end of the 2nd century Christian era. There are several copies on papyri from the mid-1st century Christian era. As far as the authorship of the letters is concerned, it would be rather difficult to hold that a single person penned the entire collection, but still in all, the letters manifest a surprising coherence and unity which could be explained by different analytical procedures. I would like to address in more detail the set of letters ranging from 10 to 17, which is the largest and longest cluster in this epistolar corpus within the Hippocratic corpus. These epistles revolve around the infirmity affecting the philosopher Democritus of Abdera, and apropos of that, it is given place the introduction of some short pieces of medical or philosophical medical content. This set of letters describe the uneasy feeling of the Abderitans in regard to their fellow citizen Democritus. They have written to Hippocrates, asking him for advice and inviting him to give them a clue about what is wrong with their local sage, so to speak. The most evident symptom of Democritus' unsound condition in his consists in his permanent laughter. He laughs all the time. Democritus laughs at serious matters, and something popped up here, and apparent Nemius wants the same. This leading to the population of Abdera to believe that Democritus has lost his sanity. In the missive, the report to Hippocrates reads, this is text 2 in your handout. For previously unattentive to everything, including himself, he's now constantly wakeful night and day, laughs at everything large and small, and thinks life in general is worth nothing. End of a quotation. The factual meeting between the physician and the philosopher is to be found in the 17th letter, where Hippocrates describes his encounter with Democritus to Damagetus. This is by far the most extensive letter of the whole collection. Hippocrates' pronouncement after having visited the Abderitan sage is that Democritus is not mad, but suffering from an excess of education, something which falls out of the comprehension of the ignorant people surrounding Democritus. In the Phaedrus, Plato had already noted that the line between madness and geniality is rather blurred. Likewise, the challenge of telling the wise apart from the mad had been put to Hippocrates. According to Hippocrates, Democritus is not affected by madness, mania, but the victim of the uncanny powers of his mind. His being prone to loneliness points rather to have become a melancholic person longing for tranquility and imperturbability, ataraxia. In addition to this, I would like to recall that in antiquity, there is a long tradition accounting for the city of Abdera as the birthplace either of sluggish mandates or of crazy personages who held greater or lesser bizarre views on all sorts of strange questions. In this latter sense, Galen put an end to his treatise, The Capacities of the Soul Depend on the Mixtures of the Body, by stating, this is text number 3 in your handout, so that among the Scythians a man became a philosopher, and among the Athenians there are plenty of them. Again, in Abdera there are many fools, but in Athens there are few. Well, just to, as a final reckon of this cluster of letters in text 4, one can read, when you know how passionately people in general striving for what is not worth striving for pour out their lives in activities that are of no value, busying themselves with things that deserve laughter. An appraisal of autarky and imperturbability, Democritus' answer to Hippocrates in letter 17 sets forth a strong criticism against the irrational and inhuman behavior and opposes a furious defense to the busy life. Democritus has succeeded in such a manner in focusing only on minding his business that the rest of people believe him to have become an idiot in the full etymologic sense of the term. Before closing this section, it is worth noting that the topic portrayed in this set of letters not only will be echoed in Cicero's Tusculan Disputations and in Seneca on the tranquility of mind, where Democritus, the everlasting laughter, is pictured alongside Heraclitus, the ceaseless weeper, but also the topic of the visit reached as far as the late Renaissance, when in 1611, the Louvain humanist Puteanus, on the occasion of his speech on laughter, made use of this anecdote, and indeed the French poet Jean de La Fontaine recollected the visit, giving it the title Démocrite des Abdéritains to one of his fables. Likewise, and despite neither Leucippus nor Democritus were painted by Raphael in the school of Athens, the point is that several continental painters from the modern period took an interest in the story and represented on their paintings Hippocrates visiting Democritus. Here you can see some of these paintings in the images you have at the end of the handout, for instance, that I shared with you, Marta has shared with you all. So on paintings from 16th century onwards, this visit of Hippocrates, the Hippocrates visit to Democritus is represent. And you see this guy here with his gestures, meaning Democritus' insanity. Well, now I move now to considering Plato's letters, the second set of letters that I've chosen to corroborate my contention above.
Jordi, sorry to interrupt you. May I ask you try not to exceed 1 hour? Because I see people are already leaving. People probably have commitments after 5:30, even considering that we started with some delay. You are already speaking for 15 minutes. Do you think you could end it in 10, maybe?
No, I'm completely unable to do that. But
okay, well, do your best. Then we probably need to skip discussion because, you know, these sessions normally have 1 hour and a half, 1 hour for the talk, half an hour for discussion.
So
sorry for that.
No worries. And thank you very much for advising me that I'm running out of time. But yes. So now I move to consider Plato. So according to Pierre Hadot, the clues about Plato's view of philosophy as the art of dying and being dead not only can be found in a set of epistles attributed to Plato, but also those for Plato's political engagement. Most insight in Plato's epistles has been shared with the aim to elucidating the authorship or authenticity, and perhaps for this reason, these writings have received little attention from the point of view of PWL. I'm not interested in the alleged authorship of these writings. This is a side of the issue that I'm not going to consider. At any rate, letter 7 in the cluster of 13 letters attributed to Plato, letter 7 is by far the longest letter of all the cluster of letters ascribed to Plato, and also the only letter which is deemed to be authentic by most experts in Plato. Now, it is a response to the friends and followers of Dion who have asked Plato to collaborate with them in work and in deed, epe kai erga, insofar as their views and purposes are the same as Dion's. Dion was the Tyrant of Syracuse. When at the age of 40, Plato reports he came over to the Sicilian city from Athens and made acquaintance with Dion. According to the report given by Plato, Dion wanted his citizens to be free and live under the best of laws. This gives place to Plato's own exposition about justice and freedom. He was about to come of age to take part in public affairs, and it happened that among the people of power at that moment, there were many friends and some relatives of his, the rule of the 30. They invited him to partake in political life, and Plato agreed with that, but he soon became sorely disappointed. In fact, he regarded the previous regime as a blessing if compared to the political practices of his acquaintances. They appointed Socrates, Plato's teacher, as one of a group sent to arrest Leon of Salamis, but Socrates refused it, for in so doing, he believed to be doing an injustice to someone who was right. When the rule of the 30 was overthrown, those who were in exile took the power and accused Socrates with charges of impiety, and the rest is well known. Socrates was sentenced to death, and once in jail, he made the decision of drinking the hemlock. He died surrounded by many of his disciples and friends, but Plato was not there on that day. This episode leads Plato to reflect how difficult it is to manage a city rightly, for he thinks it is impossible to do anything without friends and loyal followers, precisely the kind of people that he and the city lacked. Once hints one of the core passages in the letter. For instance, a good sample is in paragraph in text number 6. In my association with Dion, who was then a young man, I imparted to him my ideas of what was best for men and urged him to put them into practice. And in doing so, I was in a way contriving, though quite unwittingly, the destruction of the tyranny that later come to pass. For Dion was in all things quick to learn, especially in the matters upon which I talked with him, and he listened with a zeal and attentiveness I had never encountered in any young man, and he resolved to spend the rest of his life differently from most Italians and Sicilians, since he had come to love virtue more than pleasures and luxury. For this reason, his way of life was more than annoying to those who guided themselves by the practices of tyranny until the death of Dionysius. Later on, Plato tells us that he found the court of Dionysius full of factions and malicious rumors that the tyrant about Dion. And about the 4th month after his arrival, Dionysius charged Dion with plotting against the tyranny, had him put aboard a small vessel and exiled. Plato let us know as well that he was asked to remain in Syracuse. I quote literally from letter 7, text number 7, I put up with all this, however, holding fast to the original purpose for which I had come, hoping that he might somehow come to desire the philosophic life, but I never overcame his resistance. He's talking about Dionysius. And in the text number 8, Plato puts Dionysius' unsuccess as a ruler due to his lack of friends and political followers. And well, since we are running out of time, if you want, I can present a little bit, introduce a little bit something about Luis Vivas, which who I guess that is a not really known author for you all. Now, well, let me skip some information that probably you are not really interested in. I'm skipping all this. Yeah, Luis Vivas, the humanist Luis Vivas, exchanged with some leading figures in the politics of his time. We're talking about the early modern period, so 16th century. For those who are not familiar with the figure of Luis Vivas, a brief bio will suffice. Born in Valencia in 1492, the city was a cultural center in the newborn Spanish Catholic kingdom, which in the following century would experience its florid. Vivas' Jewish ascendants obliged him to abandon Valencia to start a long pilgrimage around Europe, this including university cities such as Paris and Oxford. Finally, he settled in Bruges, in Belgium, where he is buried, because by that time and all through the modern period, that northern part of Europe, though under the rule of the Emperor Charles V, enjoyed and granted a major tolerance to spirits like his, than the Spanish kingdom. Vivas is an important representative of the Christian humanism. He incarnates the man of the Renaissance. Vivas' friendship with Erasmus of Rotterdam is attested by an extensive correspondence between both authors. But Vivas also exchanged correspondence with several members of the European royal families of Spain, England, Austria, and Portugal, and with the Pope indeed. For instance, along with this correspondence, Vivas also dedicated some of his treatises to some European aristocrats. Among them, I would like to highlight those that Vivas addressed to Catalina of Aragon, one of the wives of Henry VIII, King of England, in response to her demand for instructing their daughter to the Princess Maria Tudor. This is text 16 in your handout. You asked me to write you a brief plan of studies, which could serve as a guide for your daughter Maria's tutor in the performance of her duties. I have gladly complied with your wishes and would like to be able to fulfill them in more important undertakings. And since you have chosen a very learned and honorable preceptor, as was proper, I have confined myself to pointing out the subjects to him with my finger. He will explain the rest. I pray the Lord that this curriculum will contribute effectively to the cultural and moral formation of your daughter. Farewell, and I want you to know that I'm completely addicted to your majesty. 9 months later, in July 1524, Vivas wrote a letter to Princess Maria, which reads, "It is the custom of princes to use in defense of their person, of their life, an escort who is always at their side, a custom more general than wise and good. Thus princes do nothing more than testify to their fear, which is almost always rooted in their own conscience. As for me, at the entreaty of your mother, an illustrious and very good woman, I will offer you an escort for your soul. She will give you more security and more peace of mind than any group of gods. For greater danger to the soul is the cunning on violence of vices than external or internal attacks on the body, and one should love the soul more than the body. You will therefore receive 200 gods or more, with whom you will become so familiar that you will not allow them to leave your sight for a moment, like flesh and blood, night or day, at home or in the street, lest deprived of their help, you fall prey to the devil. I gave them the name of symbols like insignia, as the ancient custom for princes to adorn themselves, a custom that still lasts in our days." And now, do I have still some more time, Marta, or do you want I to finish? I can't hear you.
Sorry, Actually, you wouldn't have more time, but I don't want you to. I would like you to finish your talk. So
Well,
whatever, we will have less discussion, but do finish
let
your
me
talk.
let me read just one fragment from Descartes and
Okay.
the conclusions.
Okay, and
And
maybe you can elaborate your conclusions through the discussion, maybe.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So one may expect that the correspondence between Descartes and Elizabeth of Bohemia would have addressed several ethical topics and issues, but in their exchange of letters, Descartes openly claims not to be in his aim to go into them. In fact, the discussions by the French philosopher and the Bohemian aristocrat revolve around two moot points in Descartes' metaphysics: dualism on the grounds of the supposed communication of the soul with the body, and the rational demonstration of the existence of God. Now, at any rate, insight into the content of Descartes' correspondence reveals that, regardless of his will, the philosopher did address topics in practical philosophy with Elizabeth of Bohemia and Christine of Sweden. Thus, in a letter written in the 20th November 1647 to Princess Elizabeth, we read, "A short time ago, I received letters from my friend in that country, in Sweden, informing that the Queen, having been at Uppsala, the location of that country's academy, had wished to hear a harangue of a professor of eloquence whom he deems the most capable and reasonable in that academy. And the Queen laid down the subject of the discourse, the sovereign good of this life. But after having heard this harangue, she had said these people but embellished matters, and that it would be necessary to know my opinion. I'm sending to Monsieur Chanu, Descartes friends in Sweden, certain writings that contain at greater length my sentiments in regard to the same matter, so that if it pleases her to see them, he can present her with them. The writings are letters that I have had the honor of writing to your highness regarding Seneca's book concerning the blessed life, and extending to help of the sixth letter, where having defined the passions in general, I say find difficulty in enumerating them in consequence. Well, I can stop here. And if you want, I have one page of conclusions, and with that, I put an end to my presentation. Now, in reading letters, one gets an impression of the authors, which is completely different to the reading of the essays. This being more noticeable as the authors in question are closer to oneself in time, for instance, in Vives or Descartes. Letters open a window to the circumstances, the feelings, and the lives of the authors. Letters provide us with a series of traces which are normally eluded, dismissed in the rest of their philosophical production. Take, for instance, the case of Plato, whose writings are exceptionally one of the most complete and best preserved in antiquity. But paradoxically, in none of them does Plato ever speak of himself in prima persona. There is no ego in Platonic dialogues. Millions of people around the world spend their leisure time surfing on the social media and in search of what others do and say. Some people arrange their whole schedules in view of that, and some of them have made of it indeed a living. A good deal of what has been expounded raises from the question about whether philosophers ought to converse with men and women in power. Ancient philosophy offers different views in this regard. There was issue at this point. From the two sets of letters that we have perused, it follows that the teaching of philosophy has never been a sculpture to carve statues doomed to stand idly on their pedestals and no more. Contrarily, it strives to make everything that it touches active and efficient and alive. Philosophy inspires men with impulses which urge to action, with judgments that lead them towards what is useful, with preferences for things that are honorable, with wisdom and greatness of mind joined to gentleness, and conservatism. And because they possess these qualities, men of public spirit are more eager to converse with the prominent and the powerful. A philosopher will be more eager to attend upon a soul which they see solicitous for many and are under obligation to be wise and self-restrained and just in behalf of many. The aim and end of both the speech in the mind and the speech in the utterance is friendship towards oneself and towards one's neighbor respectively. And now I'm finishing. Nowadays, politicians and governments in the self-proclaimed democratic countries tend only to ask to philosophers for advice when problems related to bioethics pop up. That is, in those cases where the entitlement to give or take human life is at stake. Politicians do not know how to handle situations like this, not even where to start. The majority of politicians in whose hands lay our hopes, wills, and discontent are far from being learned in philosophy or being committed to any kind of coherently founded ideology. On the contrary, the ascent of extremisms challenging current blatant alarms of social, economical, and environmental nature all over the planet and in Europe, as far as I'm concerned, regrettably speak for the poor presence of philosophy in politics. For the political class, philosophers are but a class of technicians on whom it is possible to call for as the last resort when things go wrong in a place where morality, social values, and religion converge and are intersected. And this in the best of cases. Apparently, we should be content with this situation inasmuch as recent experience shows that some countries go straightforwardly for permission or for prohibition without consulting or taking any advice into account. Muito obrigado. I'm so sorry for extending my presentation too much, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Jordi, for this very illuminating talk on such a beautiful and important topic, which hadn't been approached in our seminar yet. Sorry also for the pressure. I would say we can have like 10 minutes or so for questions. I wouldn't like not to give the public the opportunity to intervene. So if somebody has a question or a comment, please raise your hand.
Yeah, well, due to I was in a hurry, I don't know to what extent what I tried to introduce to present was presented clearly in the way I wanted, but I did my best at least.
I think it was very clear, yes. And
yeah, but
and Pedro Dotto has a question. Pedro, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Jordi, for this wonderful presentation. I want to hear more of it, the full version at some point, whether publish it or have a book on the subject. So I have a specific question, since you mentioned the seventh letter, and I want to hear your thoughts about it. Like in the seventh letter, Plato was indeed the author. He writes that the topic of philosophy, the subject matter of philosophy, the pragma of philosophy cannot be written about. It's not expressible in a written form. And he makes a strong contention which resonates with the Phaedrus on the weakness of writings. And there's a huge debate in the scholarship if Plato's dialogues, they suffer from this weakness of writings, or if they somehow, since they emulate the dialogical exchange between the characters in a dramatic settings, if they can indeed overcome some of the deficiencies of the written form. So I want to know your thoughts about this, the Plato's dialogues, the criticism of writing, and the limitations of the writing form for conveying a philosophical subject matter that somehow escapes written propositions because it is identified with a certain way of leading a life and conducting oneself, a way of life, basically. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marta, for this seminar.
Muito obrigado, Pedro. Well, to your first question, and to be honest, I have to tell you that I submitted to a contest in Portugal the outlines, the guidelines of this presentation. It was probably a half year ago, and recently I received the notification from the Scientific Portuguese Corporation or something like, informing me that they have rejected straightforwardly my project. So do not expect to have an output of all this kind of information soon, because I have to work on it more thoroughly, and because probably different kind of issues will pop up during the procedure. As to the second question you formulated, involving writing and well, I think you said that at a certain point, Plato himself warns us of the peril of writing in confrontation, in the confront of the oral teaching. He says, by resorting to or by alluding to the god Thoth, the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of writing, right? The god who delivers writing to humanity. There is a kind of chain. If we start from the Eastern world, Nabu, the Babylonian god of writing, converts or transforms into Thoth, and it is transformed in its turn to Hermes in the Greek pantheon, in the Greek religion. But Plato himself warns us that writing, the fact of putting our ideas, our memories in a written form, at the first glance, it might seem an advantage, but contrary-wise, it can play against us, or it can be a hindrance, because writing will stand in for our lack of memory. So at a certain point, we will be no longer able to remember as the ancients actually did. For instance, when it comes to ancient literature, ancient people, the rhapsodes, were absolutely able to remember by heart, to learn by heart, long and long pieces of writing that nowadays, if you just test it out and you ask someone over there, can you learn by heart these 3 pages? I'm absolutely unable, and the majority of us can do that. But in the past, it was possible. So, as I said, or I think I've read it, the Platonic corpus constitutes a very, very particular set of writings in the ancient world, in a sense that we possess and we preserve, and the majority of writings attributed to Plato has been laid down to us, which is an exception. And Pierre Hadot, in what is ancient philosophy, for instance, he mentions it in a sense that this is the exception. For instance, if we take into account that Chrysippus, or who was a prolific author, or some other members in the Stoa, they wrote hundreds and hundreds of writings, but none of them has been preserved. So in Plato, we have an exception, and I think, or the most sensible way to approach to it is that it is needed to take advantage of the fact that we possess an enormous, a huge, a vast corpus of literature. Another thing, another issue is whether to make out or to make categorical statements whether what we possess or what we read in Plato's dialogues actually can be identified to Plato's voice or not, or whether is Plato himself expressing himself, or they remain as a fiction. It's a kind of literary fiction, very artfully put in Greek, but it is a literary fiction. Well, I don't know whether I'm answering to your question or not, but just please be patient for an outcome. And I think that we have the fortune to possess the ideas and the probably the first philosophic system from someone who lived 2,500 years ago. This is exceptional if we take into account the rest of what has happened with the rest of Greek literature.
Thank you,
Mostly
Jordi. I'm
welcome.
sorry to hear what happened with the Portuguese application, but I also hope that nevertheless this paper will show up in print. I would love to read it.
I'm very used to it.
Yeah, we all are here. That's unfortunately that happens in 95% of the cases with FCT.
I don't think so.
I also had a very general question. Actually, it's just a curiosity after reading to your paper, after listening to your talk, is that if you think there is nowadays any valid alternative to the philosophical role that, as you have shown, correspondence has played during antiquity and the modern period. What can substitute the role of letters, correspondence today? Nobody exchanges letters anymore, right? And emails don't seem to
Yeah.
work as letters. We also don't have patience to wait as they did. We live in a time where everything is very immediate. You send an email and you expect a reply like 1 hour later or the same day or the day after. That even the timings, if we think, well, the material is different, and also the timings. How long did you need to wait? Did you have to wait for a reply to your letter? Nowadays, there doesn't seem to be anything equivalent. Or do you think there is an alternative? And if there is no alternative, what kind of impact does that have to, I don't know, philosophy, and specifically philosophy as a way of life?
Well, now this curiosity, you are pointing to a very important, to the nub of the, or at least some of the reasons which triggered this kind of project, because as you said, nowadays almost nobody writes letters. For instance, I'm not that old. I'm 47 years old, and when I was young, I wrote letters. And I received letters. I don't mean letters from the state, say, please pay the taxes. No. I mean letters from friends of mine. And I wrote letters to my friends. And I wrote love letters. And I've written letters to someone who has a position in a bank in order to make clear some kind of issues that we have. But you said that if there is any interest in the pack of things that I've tried to introduce to you, I think that one of the interesting things is that time, space, and the format of conveying messages and communication and information has been subverted, or at least in the worst of cases, banished. For instance, if we take into account, you probably are lecturers or you are teaching somewhere. Nowadays, students, when you try, you told them, or you assigned a task to them, says, please read this book. They stare at you saying, are you mad? Are you crazy? Do you really want me to read a book? For them, a book is a kind of, format containing information which is absolutely outdated, so to speak, because they just read 300 characters. They are very used to get automatic information, on-time information, and everything which falls out these kind of parameters or pattern represents a difficulty, a real difficulty to them. So
Relatedly, I've just learned that Zoom now makes summaries. Zoom right now is doing a summary of your talk on the basis of artificial intelligence. I have no idea what that is. It's the first time that I'm I'm seeing this. I'm curious to see it, but so your talk will be summarized.
I'm fully sure that I'm challenging GPT right now, because, but okay, in a sense that, well, Marta, I don't have a response to your question, because my opinion is absolutely subjective, and in my opinion, things are going from bad to worse, in a sense that critical capacity or reflective capacity, or just the possibility or the skill of learning or understanding a text, a quite long text, is being at stake at the moment. And because of that, because we are overwhelmed by short sentences, leitmotifs, everything must be a kind of pill, everything must fit in a certain way of, in a kind of prospect, and everything which falls out this kind of prospect is even not considered. So I don't know what's going on. But it's true that, in my opinion, if there's something interesting in this kind of project, it is precisely the fact that letters as a format are about to disappear.
Okay.
So,
yeah, did you want to add something?
no.
Okay, and I think it's now time to close the session. Thank you very much once again, Jordi, and to all of you who were present and remained till the end. I wish you happy holidays, and we will be back next year on January 17 with a talk by Laura Müller. Looking forward to it too. I hope to see you all again then, and until then, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of you. Let's meet again next year.
Holiday.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.